I watched my husband's hand grip my wrist across the marble island, his fingers digging into the exact spot where bruises had formed in my previous life. The pressure was familiar. The words that would come next I already knew by heart. Lisa, my mother needs to be added to your trust fund account. Today. In my first life, I'd flinched. I'd asked why. I'd cried when he squeezed harder and told me I was being selfish, that his mother had raised him alone, that I owed her everything for allowing our marriage. I'd signed the papers with trembling hands while Margaret, my beloved mother-in-law, smiled at me like a cobra eyeing a mouse. But that was before I died at 42 in a county hospital, penniless and alone, my organs failing from the stress of homelessness and malnutrition. Before I took my last breath, remembering how Margaret had withdrawn every cent from our joint account 3 days after I'd added her. How she and David had laughed when I'd begged them to return just enough for my mother's cancer treatment. How they'd moved into a penthouse together, mother and son, spending my family's money while I slept in my car. Before I woke up 20 years younger, gasping in our old apartment, with David's hand on my wrist and the same demand on his lips. Of course, I said softly, exactly as I had before. Whatever your mother needs. David's grip loosened. He hadn't expected it to be this easy. In the original timeline, I'd fought for 3 days before giving in. His eyes narrowed with suspicion. Really? She's family, I said, channeling the naive 22-year-old I'd been. And you're right, I've been selfish. My parents left me that money, but we're married now. What's mine is yours. What's yours is your mother's. I understand. The words tasted like poison, but I kept my face serene. David studied me for a long moment, then smiled. That same charming smile that had once made my heart flutter and later made my stomach turn. I knew you'd come around. My mom will be so grateful. She's been worried about her retirement. Retirement. Margaret was 53 and worked as a real estate agent, pulling in $200,000 a year, but in my previous life, she'd stopped working the day after she stole my money. Why would she need to work when she had $8 million of my inheritance to burn through? When should I go to the bank? I asked. Tomorrow. I'll come with you. We'll make a day of it, then take Mom to that French place she likes. The same French restaurant where they'd toasted to their good fortune while I'd sat there, not yet understanding that I'd just signed away my future. Where Margaret had ordered the most expensive wine and told me I looked tired, that marriage was harder than I'd expected, wasn't it? That sounds lovely, I said. David kissed my forehead, already reaching for his phone. Texting Margaret, no doubt. Telling her the job was done, the mark had fallen for it again. But this time, the mark knew the game, and she'd spent 20 years in hell learning how to play it better. The first time around, I'd been an only child, orphaned at 20 when my parents died in a car accident. They'd left me everything, their house, their savings, the payout from their life insurance, the proceeds from selling my father's medical practice, $8 million managed in a trust fund that released monthly stipends until I turned 25, at which point I'd gain full access. I'd met David 3 months after the funeral. He'd been a pharmaceutical sales rep who'd called on my father's practice. He'd come to the wake, held my hand, told me he'd always admired my father's work. He'd been 26, handsome, attentive. He'd made me feel less alone. We'd married 6 months later. His mother had planned the entire wedding. I'd been so grateful for her help, for her presence. I'd lost my own mother. Margaret had seemed like a gift. The trust fund had specific rules. I could add beneficiaries, but I couldn't remove them without a 60-day waiting period and a court order. My parents had structured it that way to protect me from impulsive decisions. They'd never imagined I'd be manipulated into adding a thief. In my original life, I'd added Margaret on a Tuesday. She'd withdrawn everything on Friday. By Monday, when I'd realized what happened and tried to report it, David had presented a document, forged I later learned, showing that I'd gifted the money to his mother. The bank had refused to help. The police had called it a civil matter. My lawyer had said we could fight it, but it would take years and cost more than I had. David had filed for divorce that same week. No fault, he'd said. We'd just grown apart. He'd kept the apartment in his name only. I'd left with my clothes and my car, which broke down 3 months later. Margaret had blocked my number. David had moved in with her. I'd learned later that they'd done this twice before, to his first wife and to his college girlfriend. They were a team. She found the marks, he charmed them, and together they bled them dry. I'd spent the next 20 years trying to survive. Minimum wage jobs, sleeping in shelters, watching my health deteriorate without insurance. I'd tried to warn the women I saw him target afterward he'd moved on to wife number 3 within a year, but no one believed me. I looked crazy by then. Probably was crazy. The heart attack had almost been a relief, but then I'd woken up in our old bedroom, David asleep beside me, my phone showing a date 20 years in the past. I'd stumbled to the bathroom and vomited, my young, healthy body rejecting the impossibility of what had happened. Rebirth, regression. Whatever name it carried, I had it. I had a second chance. And this time, I knew exactly what they were planning. The bank manager, Peter Chen, greeted us like old friends. He'd handled my parents' estates, had known me since I was 16. In my previous life, he'd looked heartbroken when I'd come to him after the theft, but there had been nothing he could do. The withdrawal had been legal. Margaret had been an authorized user. Lisa, David, wonderful to see you both, he said, shaking our hands. And Mrs. Thorne, welcome. Margaret smiled her warm, motherly smile. She was wearing a cream-colored suit, pearls, her silver hair in a perfect bob. She looked trustworthy, respectable, like someone's beloved grandmother. She was a predator in expensive clothing. Thank you for seeing us on such short notice, Margaret said. Lisa has been so generous. I'm just overwhelmed. Mom's been stressed about retirement, David said, his hand on my shoulder. Lisa and I want to make sure she's taken care of. She gave me everything. It's only right we give back. Peter nodded approvingly. In the original timeline, I'd seen the same look. Everyone had thought I was being a dutiful daughter-in-law. No one had questioned why a 22-year-old would give her 53-year-old mother-in-law access to millions of dollars. Well, let's get the paperwork started, Peter said. Lisa, I'll need you to sign several documents. Mrs. Thorne, you'll need to provide identification and signature cards. The account will show you both as equal holders with full access. Actually, I said, I'd like to make a small change to my account first, before we add Margaret. David's hand tightened on my shoulder. What kind of change? I kept my voice light, confused. Well, I was reading the trust documents last night. I couldn't sleep, and I realized I have some investment options I haven't been using. Some of the money could be earning much better interest. I'd like to move some funds around before we add your mom. That way she can benefit from the better returns, too. It was a lie, but a plausible one. I'd been young and financially naive in my first life. It made sense I'd be learning about my options now. Margaret's smile didn't waver, but her eyes sharpened. That's very thoughtful, dear, but there's no rush. We can handle that after I'm added. I'd hate to delay things. It'll only take a few minutes, I insisted. Peter, can you help me move some funds into the high-yield options? Maybe $3 million into the market account? $2 million into bonds? I saw David and Margaret exchange a glance. They didn't want delays. They wanted her name on the account now before I could change my mind, but they couldn't object too strenuously without showing their hand. Of course, Peter said. Let me pull up your portfolio. While he worked, I chatted pleasantly with Margaret about her retirement plans. She told me she was thinking of buying a condo in Florida, maybe traveling to Europe. She'd always wanted to see Paris. In my previous life, she'd bought a penthouse in Manhattan and spent three months in Paris. On my money, posting photos on social media while I'd been evicted from a apartment I could no longer afford. That sounds wonderful, I said. You deserve it. The fund transfers took 20 minutes. Peter walked me through each one, explaining the interest rates, the risk levels. I signed where he indicated, my young signature neat and careful. Margaret watched every movement, her fingers drumming on her Hermes purse. Then it was time. Now, Peter said. Let's add Mrs. Thorne to your primary account. I signed. Margaret signed. David witnessed. Peter processed everything. Printed out new account statements showing both our names. You'll both have full access, Peter explained. Either of you can withdraw, deposit, transfer funds. Your debit cards will arrive in 5 to 7 business days, but you can use your existing card, Lisa, or come in for over-the-counter withdrawals. Perfect, Margaret said. Her hand touched mine across the desk. Thank you, sweetheart. You have no idea what this means to me. I smiled at her, this woman who would steal from me in 3 days. Your family, that's what family does. We went to lunch at the French restaurant. Margaret ordered champagne. David toasted to family. I barely touched my food, claiming I wasn't feeling well. They didn't notice. They were too busy celebrating. I excused myself to the bathroom and made a phone call. Detective Morrison, this is Lisa Thorne. We spoke about my parents' case a few months ago. Yes, I appreciate you taking the time. I need to talk to you about something else, something urgent. Can we meet tomorrow? Perfect, thank you. Raymond Morrison had been the detective assigned to my parents' accident investigation. It had been ruled an accident. Black ice, bad luck. But I'd never been fully satisfied. In my previous life, I'd let it go. Too much grief, too much David whispering in my ear that I needed to move forward. But I'd learned something in those 20 years of poverty and desperation. I'd learned to notice details. And there were details about my parents' deaths that had always bothered me. Details I was finally ready to investigate. Margaret waited exactly 2 days. I'd known she would. In my original timeline, she'd waited 3, but this time we'd added her on a Tuesday instead of a Monday. She liked to work on Thursdays. Something about the bank being busy, her transactions getting lost in the shuffle. I went to my morning yoga class, the same class I'd attended in my first life where I'd been when she'd robbed me. I kept my phone on silent in my locker. I didn't need to check it. I knew what was happening. At 10:47 a.m., Margaret walked into the Fifth Avenue branch of my bank. She withdrew $7,900,000. She left $100,000 in the account, enough that I wouldn't notice immediately if I was stupid. She'd learned from previous marks that taking everything triggered immediate panic. Leaving a little bit bought her time. She transferred the money to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, a route she'd used before. By noon, my inheritance was gone. I found out at 2 p.m. when I checked my account on my phone. I stood in the parking lot of the yoga studio staring at the balance and let myself feel it. The rage, the betrayal, the devastating loss. Then I took a deep breath and dialed 911. I need to report a theft, I said, my voice shaking, not with fear but with anticipation. Someone stole almost $8 million from my bank account. The police arrived at my apartment within an hour. 2 officers, one young and eager, one older and skeptical. I let them in, played the part of the confused, devastated young woman. I don't understand, I said, showing them my phone. I had $8 million this morning. Now there's only $100,000. Where did it go? The older officer, Sergeant Williams, frowned at my statement. Ma'am, do you share this account with anyone? No, Nitsa, I said. Then paused. Wait, I added my mother-in-law 2 days ago, but she couldn't have. What's her name? Margaret Thorne. But this has to be a mistake. She's family. She wouldn't steal from me. Even as I said it, I pulled up my laptop, logged into my banking portal. The officers watched as I showed them the transaction history. One massive withdrawal, one transfer to an account number I didn't recognize. I need to call her, I said. There must be an explanation. I dialed Margaret's number. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice warm and concerned. Lisa, honey, what's wrong? Mom, something happened with my bank account. Almost all the money is gone. Did you make a withdrawal? Silence. Then a withdrawal? Of course not. How much is missing? Almost $8 million. I heard her gasp. In my first life, I'd believed that gasp. I'd thought she was shocked, sympathetic. Now I knew she was calculating her next move. Oh my God, Lisa, you need to call the bank immediately. This must be fraud. Someone must have hacked your account. I'm here with the police now, I said. They're asking if anyone else had access to the account. Another pause. Longer this time. Well, you added me on Tuesday, but I haven't touched it. I wouldn't dream of it. That's your money, sweetie. Your parents left it to you. Could you check your account? Maybe someone hacked both of us? Of course, let me look. I heard typing sounds. She was probably checking to make sure the transfer had gone through. No, everything looks normal on my end. Lisa, this is terrible. Do you want me to come over? Where's David? David's at work. I don't know what to do. Let me talk to the officers, Margaret said. Put them on. I handed the phone to Sergeant Williams. I watched his face as Margaret spun her story. She was a concerned mother-in-law. She'd never accessed the account. She couldn't believe someone would do this to her sweet daughter-in-law. She offered to come to the station to provide any help she could. Williams handed the phone back to me. Mrs. Thorne, we're going to need you to come down to the station to file a formal report. We'll also need to contact your bank's fraud department. Of course, I said, whatever you need. After they left, I called David. He answered cheerfully. He was probably with Margaret celebrating. Hey, babe, what's up? David, something terrible happened. Someone stole the money from my account. I heard him suck in a breath. What? How much? Almost everything. The police were just here. The police? His voice pitched higher. Why did you call the police? Because someone stole $8 million from me. What was I supposed to do? Of course, I'm coming home. He arrived 20 minutes later, Margaret right behind him. They both looked concerned, stressed. Margaret hugged me, smelling of Chanel No. 5 and lies. We'll figure this out, she promised. The bank must have insurance for this kind of thing. David paced the living room. Did you tell the police that Mom has access to the account? They asked if anyone else was on it. I had to tell them. He stopped pacing. What exactly did you tell them? Just that I'd added your mother 2 days ago. They want to talk to her. And to the bank. Margaret's hand tightened on my shoulder. Of course. I'll cooperate fully. I have nothing to hide. But she did. And I knew exactly where she'd hidden it. Detective Morrison called me that evening. Ms. Thorne, I got your message about wanting to meet. Given what I'm hearing happened today, I think we should talk sooner rather than later. You heard about the theft? I have a friend in the department who mentioned it. $8 million is a lot of money to lose. The sergeant on your case said you'd added your mother-in-law to the account recently. 2 days ago. And the money disappeared today. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. You want to tell me why you really called me yesterday? Before this happened? I closed my eyes. This was the gamble. Morrison was a good cop, thorough and honest. In my previous life, I'd never thought to reach out to him. But now, with 20 years of hindsight and a second chance, I'd realized something important. My parents' accident had been too convenient. I want to talk to you about my parents' deaths, I said. I think it might be connected to what's happening now. That's a serious accusation. I have evidence. Or at least I know where to look for it. Can we meet? He agreed to come to the apartment the next morning. After I hung up, I sat in the silence, thinking about the pieces I'd started to put together in my previous life. Too late to matter. My parents had died 3 months before I'd met David. Their car had gone off a bridge in upstate New York during a weekend trip. Black ice, the investigation had concluded. No foul play suspected. But my father had been driving a new Mercedes, with all-season tires and advanced safety features. He'd grown up in Buffalo. He knew how to drive in winter conditions. And the bridge they'd gone off, I'd driven past it dozens of times. It wasn't particularly dangerous. There were guardrails. In my first life, drowning in grief, I'd accepted the explanation. People died in accidents every day, but later, homeless and desperate, I'd started researching. I'd learned that David's first wife's parents had also died in a car accident, 6 months before David married her. His college girlfriend's father had been killed in a hit-and-run 2 months before she'd given David access to her trust fund. 3 marks, 3 sets of dead parents, 3 inheritances. I'd tried to report my suspicions to the police, but by then, I was a homeless woman with mental health problems. No one had believed me. I'd sounded like a conspiracy theorist, but now I was a credible victim of a crime, and I had Detective Morrison's attention. Now I could make someone listen. Morrison arrived at 8 a.m. carrying a coffee and a thick folder. He was in his 50s with gray hair and tired eyes. He'd been kind to me after my parents died, patient with my questions. "Ms. Thorne," he said, settling into my living room chair. "Let's talk." I'd prepared for this. I had printouts, notes, everything I'd learned in my previous life organized and ready. "I think my husband and his mother killed my parents." He didn't laugh, didn't dismiss me, just nodded slightly. "Go on." "My husband's first wife was named Jennifer Cole. Her parents died in a car accident in 2018. David married her 3 months later. Within a year, he'd convinced her to add his mother to her investment accounts. His mother withdrew everything and disappeared. Jennifer tried to sue, but the money was gone. She died of a drug overdose 2 years later." I slid across newspaper clippings I'd printed from online archives. Morrison read them carefully. His college girlfriend was Amanda Price. Her father was killed in a hit-and-run in 2015. She inherited his estate. David convinced her to add his mother as a beneficiary on several accounts. Same pattern. Margaret withdrew everything and vanished. Amanda tried to press charges, but there wasn't enough evidence. She's still alive, working 3 jobs to pay off the legal fees from trying to get her money back. More printouts, more evidence. Morrison's expression hardened. "My parents died in January. I met David in March. He was so understanding, so supportive. We married in September, and 2 months ago he started pressuring me to add his mother to my accounts." I paused. 2 days ago I did. Yesterday she stole $8 million. You're saying they've done this multiple times? At least 3 times that I can prove. Maybe more. And you think they murdered your parents to access your inheritance? I think they murder the parents of wealthy young women, then swoop in to comfort them. They marry the daughters, gain access to the money, and steal it. If my parents were alive, they'd have questioned David. They'd have protected me, so they had to die. Morrison leaned back. "That's a serious accusation. Do you have any proof?" "Not yet, but I know what to look for now." I pulled out another document. My father's Mercedes had a maintenance record. It was serviced the week before they died. Everything was perfect. But the investigation report says the brakes failed. Brake failure can happen. It can. But wouldn't it be worth checking if someone tampered with them? And wouldn't it be interesting if David or Margaret had been in the area around the time of my parents' trip? Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he opened his folder. "I pulled the file on your parents' accident after you called. I also made some calls to colleagues in other jurisdictions about the cases you mentioned." He spread out photographs. Jennifer Cole's parents' crashed car, Amanda Price's father's hit-and-run scene, my parents' Mercedes in the river. "I don't believe in coincidences, Siam," he said. 3 wealthy young women, all orphaned, all targeted by the same man and his mother. That's not coincidence. That's pattern. Can you prove it? Not yet, but I know someone who can help. He pulled out his phone. "I have a friend at the FBI. They handle serial financial crimes. And if what you're suggesting is true, that the Thornes are murdering people to access their children's inheritances, that's multiple counts of murder, fraud, and conspiracy." My heart was racing. In my previous life, I'd never made it this far. I'd never connected the dots in time, never reported it properly, never been believed. What do I need to do? Keep acting normal. Don't let them know you suspect anything. The theft case will proceed through normal channels. The bank will investigate, insurance will get involved, but in the meantime, we'll be building the bigger case. I need you to give me everything you have on David and Margaret. Phone records, emails, anything. I can do that. And Ms. Thorne? Be careful. If they've killed before, they won't hesitate to do it again. The bank's fraud investigation took 3 days. Margaret maintained her innocence, claiming she'd never accessed the account. But the bank's records were clear. The withdrawal had been made using her credentials from her device at a branch she frequented. The funds had been transferred to an offshore account. The bank couldn't retrieve them, but they could trace them. And what they found was interesting. The offshore account belonged to a shell corporation. That corporation had ties to two other shell corporations. Those corporations had received large transfers in 2019 and 2016, right after Jennifer Cole and Amanda Price had been robbed. The FBI got involved on day 4. Special Agent Sarah Chen was a specialist in financial crimes. She was brilliant, relentless, and she believed me from the start. "We've been watching Margaret Thorne for 2 years," she admitted in our first meeting. "We suspected she was running a romance scam operation, but we couldn't prove it. The victims were too embarrassed to cooperate, and she was careful. But this is different. You reported it immediately. You have records, and now we have a pattern." She spread out a timeline. Jennifer, Amanda, me, 3 marks, but there were gaps. "We think there might be more," Chen said. Women who never reported it, women who died before they could. We're going through unsolved deaths of young heirs over the past decade." David was arrested on day 7. They came for him at his office. I watched from across the street, my heart pounding as federal agents led him out in handcuffs. His face was shocked, pale. He'd thought he was untouchable. Margaret was arrested the same day. They raided her apartment and found documents, bank statements, forged signatures, a ledger of victims going back 15 years. She'd been doing this since David was a teenager. She'd trained him to be her accomplice, her hunter, her son and partner in crime. They'd killed at least 6 people, murdered them to access their children's money. My parents were just the most recent. The news broke that evening. Mother-son team arrested in multi-million-dollar murder scheme. I watched the coverage from my apartment, a glass of wine in my hand that I didn't drink. In my previous life, they'd gotten away with it. They'd stolen my money, destroyed my life, and moved on to their next victim. David had married wife number 3, a 24-year-old whose parents had died in a house fire. I'd tried to warn her. She'd called me a crazy stalker. I wondered if she was still alive in this timeline, if my changing the past had saved her too. The trial took 8 months. I testified about the theft, about David's manipulation, about Margaret's lies. Jennifer Cole testified via video call. She was in rehab, trying to put her life back together, but she was alive and she was willing to talk. Amanda Price flew in from Seattle and told her story with a quiet dignity that made the jury weep. The prosecutors built their case methodically. They traced the murders, showed how David had been present in each location at the time of death, how Margaret had researched the victims, planned the approaches, laundered the money. They found the mechanic Margaret had paid to tamper with my father's brakes. He'd kept records, insurance against her ever turning on him. He testified in exchange for a reduced sentence. They found the emails between David and Margaret planning my parents' deaths. "She's perfect," David had written. "Young, orphaned, rich, and lonely. Exactly our type." Margaret had responded, "Make sure the parents can't interfere. We'll do it like we did the Coles. Clean and simple." Reading those emails in court, I finally let myself cry. My parents hadn't died in an accident. They'd been murdered because I'd been a good mark, because I'd had money and no one to protect me. The jury deliberated for 3 hours, guilty on all counts: 6 counts of murder, 3 counts of grand larceny, multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. David got life without parole. Margaret got the same. I walked out of the courthouse into the sunshine and called Detective Morrison. "It's over," I said. "It is. You did good, kid." "I just testified." "You did more than that. You broke the pattern. You stopped them. How many people do you think they would have killed if you hadn't?" "I didn't know. Maybe dozens. Maybe hundreds." They'd been good at it, practiced. If I hadn't remembered my previous life, if I hadn't been given this impossible second chance, they'd still be out there. Hunting. "Thank you," I said, "for believing me. Thank you for being brave enough to come forward." The bank's insurance paid out my stolen funds. The FBI recovered another $4 million from various offshore accounts. I ended up with more than I'd started with, ironically. I used some of it to hire a lawyer for Jennifer Cole, to pay for her rehab and set up a trust fund for her recovery. I sent Amanda Price a check for the legal fees she'd incurred trying to get her money back. I donated a substantial amount to organizations that helped victims of financial crimes, and I kept the rest. My parents' money, The inheritance they'd left me, expecting I'd use it wisely. I was 23. I had my whole life ahead of me. I had my health, my freedom, and my future back. I also had something else, knowledge. 20 years of memories that technically hadn't happened yet. I knew which stocks would boom, which companies would fail. I knew about September 11th, about the 2008 crash, about COVID-19. I knew about tech startups that would become giants and medical breakthroughs that would change the world. I could use that knowledge, become wealthy beyond my inheritance, build something lasting. But first, I had something else to do. I visited my parents' graves on a Tuesday afternoon, carrying flowers and a bottle of my father's favorite scotch. I sat on the grass between their headstones and told them everything. "I know what happened," I said. "I know they killed you. I know why. And I made sure they paid for it." The wind rustled through the cemetery trees. I liked to think they heard me. "I'm going to be okay," I continued. "I'm going to use the money you left me the right way. I'm going to build something good, something that helps people. I'm going to make you proud." I poured a small amount of scotch on my father's grave, remembering how he used to drink it on Friday nights, sitting in his study, reading medical journals. How my mother would bring him cookies and they'd talk about their days. They'd been good people. They'd deserved to grow old together, to see me graduate college, to walk me down the aisle at a real wedding to a good man, to meet their grandchildren. Margaret and David had stolen that from them, from all of us, but they were in prison now. They'd never hurt anyone again. And I was here, alive, with a second chance to live the life my parents had wanted for me. "I love you," I whispered. "I'll never forget you, and I'll never waste this gift you gave me." 6 months after the trial, I enrolled in business school. I'd dropped out of college in my first life, too devastated by my parents' deaths and too consumed by David's manipulation. But now I went back determined to finish. I was careful about dating. Every man who showed interest, I researched thoroughly. I looked for patterns, for red flags, for signs of the predatory behavior that I now knew to watch for. I made friends slowly, testing their loyalty, their honesty. I'd learned the hard way that not everyone who smiled at you had your best interests at heart. But I also learned to trust again, to open up, to let people in. I met Rebecca in a marketing class. She was smart, funny, and genuinely kind. She'd also lost her parents young, to cancer, not murder. And she understood grief in a way most people our age didn't. "You're different," she said one day over coffee. "You seem older than 23. Like you've lived more than you should have." "I have," I said. In a way, I couldn't tell her the truth. Who would believe it? But I could tell her about losing my parents, about David and Margaret's betrayal, about the trial. That was enough. "I'm glad you're okay now," Rebecca said. "I'm glad they didn't win." Me too. And I was. Every morning I woke up in my own bed, in my own apartment, with my own money safely in my own account. I felt grateful. Every day, I wasn't living in my car or sleeping in a shelter or dying alone in a county hospital was a gift. I'd been given an impossible second chance, and I wasn't going to waste it. 2 years later, I started my own company, a security firm that specialized in protecting vulnerable people from financial predators. We helped young heirs, recent widows, anyone who might be targeted by people like Margaret and David. We employed former FBI agents, white-collar crime specialists, forensic accountants. We taught people how to spot manipulation, how to protect their assets, how to recognize the warning signs of financial abuse. Business was good. Apparently, there were a lot of predators out there, and now there were people fighting back. I hired Jennifer Cole as a consultant. She'd gotten sober, gotten therapy, and turned her experience into expertise. She knew how predators thought because she'd been hunted by the best. Amanda Price joined us too, bringing her own insights and a fierce determination to protect others from what had happened to her. Together, we built something powerful, something that would have saved us if it had existed when we'd needed it. 5 years after my rebirth, I got a call from the FBI. Special Agent Chen wanted to meet. "We found another victim," she said when we sat down in her office. "A woman named Claire Martinez. Her parents died in a boating accident in 2010. 6 months later, she met a man named David Thorne. My blood ran cold. That's impossible. David's in prison. Not David. His younger brother, Michael. We didn't know Margaret had two sons. Michael was careful. He stayed out of the initial investigation. But he learned from his mother and brother, and he's been operating on his own. Where is he now? That's the problem. We don't know, but we found emails between Margaret and Michael from prison. She's been coaching him, telling him how to avoid the mistakes she and David made. We think he's targeting someone right now, a woman whose parents died recently. We just don't know who. Chen showed me photographs. Michael looked like David, but younger, smoother, more refined. He'd learned from his family's failures. What do you need from me? I asked. We need bait. Someone he'd find attractive, someone wealthy and vulnerable. She looked at me carefully. Someone like you. I should have said no. I'd already played this game once and I'd barely survived. But I thought about Claire Martinez, about Jennifer and Amanda, about my parents. What's the plan? I asked. We set it up carefully. I created a fake identity, Veronica Ashford, a 28-year-old heiress whose parents had died in a plane crash. I was worth $15 million, recently single, and very, very lonely. We built my profile on social media, created a history, made me real. Then we waited for Michael to find me. It took 3 weeks. He sent a message through Instagram. He'd seen my posts about missing my parents. He'd lost his father young, he understood. Would I like to get coffee sometime? I said yes. Michael was good, better than David had been. He was patient, charming, never pushy. He let me open up to him at my own pace. He shared his own grief, real or manufactured, I couldn't tell, and made me feel understood. The FBI monitored everything, every date, every call, every text. They were building a case. On our 6th date, Michael mentioned his mother. She was in prison, he said sadly. Wrongly convicted. He didn't like to talk about it. What was she convicted of? I asked, all innocence. Financial crimes, but she was framed. My brother, too. They were trying to help someone, and it went wrong. I made a sympathetic noise. Inside, I was recording every word. 3 months in, Michael suggested I meet his financial advisor. You should make sure your money is working for you, he said. My guy is great. Very trustworthy. The financial advisor was another con artist. Together, they would have convinced me to invest in fake companies, transfer money to offshore accounts, anything to separate me from my inheritance. But the FBI was ready. They arrested Michael and his advisor on the same day, charging them with conspiracy to commit fraud. They raided his apartment and found evidence of 5 other marks, including Claire Martinez. Michael had stolen $2.3 million over the past 3 years. He'd been good at it, but he hadn't been good enough. At Michael's trial, I testified again. This time, I wasn't a victim. I was a witness, a professional who'd helped catch a criminal. Margaret was brought from prison to testify. She was older, grayer, diminished, but her eyes still had that calculating gleam. You, she said when she saw me. You ruined everything. You killed my parents? I replied calmly. You destroyed my life. Or you tried to. I did destroy your life. I took everything from you. In another timeline, maybe, but not in this one. In this one, I won. She stared at me, confused. Then her eyes narrowed. What do you mean, another timeline? I smiled. Nothing, just that you underestimated me. You thought I was weak. That was your mistake. Michael got 15 years. His advisor got 10. More victims came forward, more cases were built. The Thorne family's criminal enterprise was finally completely dismantled. And I went back to my company, my life, my hard-won peace. 10 years after my rebirth, I stood in my office overlooking Central Park. My company had offices in 12 cities. We'd helped hundreds of people protect themselves from financial predators. We'd worked with law enforcement to catch dozens of criminals. Jennifer and Amanda were my business partners now. We'd built this together, 3 women who'd survived the same predator and turned our trauma into purpose. I was 32. In my previous life, I'd been homeless at this age, my health failing, my hope gone. Now I was successful, stable, surrounded by people I trusted. I'd never remarried. Dating was complicated when you'd lived 2 lifetimes. But I had friends, colleagues, a community. I had purpose. And I had my parents' legacy, finally being used the way they'd intended. My phone rang. Detective Morrison, now retired but still in touch. Hey, kid, saw the news about the latest arrest. Nice work. Thanks. Couldn't have done it without you. You did all the heavy lifting. I just pointed you in the right direction. He paused. Your parents would be proud. My throat tightened. I hope so. I know so. You took something terrible and made it matter. That's all anyone can do. After we hung up, I stood at the window, watching the sun set over the city. Somewhere out there, Margaret and David were in prison cells, Michael too. They'd spend the rest of their lives paying for what they'd done, and I was here. Free, alive, thriving. I'd been given an impossible gift, a second chance at life. I'd used it to get justice, to protect others, to build something meaningful. The girl I'd been at 22, naive, trusting, vulnerable, was gone. She'd died in that first timeline, murdered by poverty and despair. But the woman I'd become? She was stronger than anyone who'd tried to destroy her. She was smart enough to spot a trap and turn it against her enemies. She was brave enough to fight back. I raised my coffee cup to my reflection in the window, to the woman I'd become, to the second chance I'd seized with both hands, to survival, to justice, to revenge served perfectly cold. Margaret had withdrawn everything from my account, thinking she'd won. But I'd reported it stolen, and in doing so, I'd stolen everything from her, her freedom, her son, her future. In the end, I'd won after all.